Breaking Bread is brought to you by North York Community House, an organization that builds strong, resilient, and inclusive communities in Northwest Toronto.
It's time for a shift. This is the shift. Big change, big things in the phase. Yeah. Big change, big things.
My name is Kaydeen Bankasingh, and I'll be your host for this episode of Breaking Bread, Stories of Black Communities in Transition. Our limited podcast series seeks to take a deeper dive into redevelopment and uncover the truth about this phenomenon in the city of Toronto. Throughout this journey, we'll be speaking to residents and industry experts to shed light on the experiences of those living through these major transitions, providing further insight into the real consequences of urban redevelopment. This is episode 7 of Breaking Bread, Stories of Black Communities in Transition.
Tired of the self-hurt, so I put in that. Yeah, this is the shift. Big change, big things, a new phase. Yeah, big change, big things, a new phase. Yeah, big change, big things, a new phase.
In our last episodes of Breaking Bread, we talked with Gary Miedema from Heritage Planning. We discussed what heritage is, what it signifies in our redevelopment communities within Toronto, and more importantly, how to engage communities in this process. Today we'll be discussing equitable redevelopment. We're joined by Trudy-Ann Powell, resident, community leader, and advocate for Lawrence Heights residents. So Trudy, can you please introduce yourself for us?
So my name is Trudy-Ann Powell. I'm a resident of Lawrence Heights, and I love to say 20 plus years. I'm a mother hawk, and I'm a community advocate. I could go on, but I'll leave it right there.
So maybe you can tell us just a little bit more about what makes you our resident expert on this topic on equitable redevelopment. So maybe just to go a little bit deeper on who you are and what you do.
So even though I'm a resident for 20 years, I'm still young and I still have my youth, right? So that means I've been around for quite some times, being from the younger generation and seeing a lot of the older generation going up and paving the way for me. And the fact that I'm still here, right, speaks to my expertise, right, being a resident.
All right, thank you so much. So you're here speaking specifically on our topic of equitable redevelopment. So I'm wondering if you could tell me what equitable redevelopment means to you.
For me, that every member of my community should be able to benefit overall. And when I say that, it may sound broad, but I'm taking the whole social determinants of health into consideration, right? Where we need to see social improvement based on our socioeconomic background here in Lawrence Heights, people-based assets building, right? Sustainable schools, smart growth with Ontario and the Growth Development Plan. So overall, the community members of Lawrence Heights and the residents should be able to benefit from whatever project, because redevelopment could be a whole scope of different things, but we want it to be fair and we want to be inclusive in everything, every step of the way.
Thank you very much, because in fact, when what equitable redevelopment means to you is more than just building buildings, right? You're saying social determinants of health, people should benefit. So in fact, it's more than just building new buildings.
Exactly. We always say that from day one, it's beyond bricks and mortars, right? We've just gone through a pandemic, right? Whether it's people's mental health. So that's what I'm saying. It's broad, right? So it all depends on, because in Lawrence Heights, we have a vast majority of residents, right? So it's overall, because what would resonate to me would resonate different with one of my other residents, right? My neighbor, so to speak.
So I'm gonna just invite you to maybe speak a little bit more about what factors need to be in place, or in your opinion, what are those specific actions that actually enable or contribute to equitable redevelopment really happening in the way that you've described it?
What needs to be in place,
Mm-hmm.
I feel it's a community benefits agreement.
Mm-hmm.
Right now in Lawrence Heights, that's the biggest thing. We have like the heritage plan, the social development plan. We're going on to phase 2 and 3 right now. So we need a community benefits agreement that is legally binding with all these equitable developments embedded within there.
Okay, great. So would you be comfortable talking about what actions might contribute then to a community benefits agreement?
Well, the factor that needs to contribute to a community benefits agreement, right? Because it has to take into consideration the mass, right? So all the different stakeholders have to come on board, right, and ensure we put this in place. We could talk about the different key players and
Which
things
is
like
going to
that.
be my next question, actually. So if you're okay, maybe just telling us who some of those key players are.
I'm always from the perspective that is residents first.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We have our community organizations within here, the different governmental organizations, City of Toronto. I read the land acknowledgement,
Mm-hmm.
City of Toronto. We have the province. We're talking about the growth plan right now, right? Where if you're talking about growth, we want to see rent to own within here, right? And also the federal government. We're talking about community center or state of the art center where we could have different facilities within here where people could benefit from,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it encompasses the government agencies, right? Residents first. And not only that, having residents at the table to input in and making these decisions. And I want to point out specifically to the Toronto Community Benefit Network, right? Because they have a lot of expertise when it comes to getting community benefit agreement and working with residents from the ground up.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much for sharing that, because most people would never consider, or let's say most people like yourselves, you and I, we live in the communities, we do work in the communities, but rarely do we understand that, in fact, rebuilding our community involves the government or involves the federal governments, as well, the provincial and municipal. So our key
Yeah,
players is not just an individual, right? But even policies and legislation that enables, investments and this type of redevelopment to happen. So thank you for sharing that. Okay, so let me ask you now a different question, and we're moving into how people are organizing. And I would say organizing is an action, right? That we are saying needs to happen as well. But how have tenants organized themselves to advocate for resident needs throughout the revitalization happening in the Lawrence Heights community?
well, tenants been organizing in Lawrence Heights, right? Spoke to my youth, right? I remember when we have the tenants advocacy group, which is TAG through Unison, right? We had B part supported by the Wellesley Institute came in talk about community assets, right? Residents had the grassroots priorities, community priorities prior to revitalization starting in Lawrence Heights, right? We have the feisty seniors, right? And to date, we have different grassroots groups, but Lawrence Heights Revitalized Coalition is organizing to ensure that residents is at the table and also have an input in a lot what's going on to ensure that we have the equitable development that we need here, especially going on for phase 2 and phase 3.
Mm-hmm. Wow, thank you. So tenants have been advocating, it sounds like, for a number of years in different capacities to ensure their involvement in this revitalization in the community. Trudy-Ann, what's your role in these initiatives? Or what has been your role? Because it's been a number of years. So what have you been doing, and what do you do currently to support these initiatives?
Well, I'm a part of so many groups, right? Don't want to say stretch myself thin,
Mhm.
but For example, I mentioned tag. I remember when I was 16 and at those tables, you know, because I've always been living on my own in Lawrenceside. So therefore, I have to, you know, fester up and be at these tables to ensure what's going on, right? Also, one of the instrumental things is me being a community animator, right? So, and being a community animator, I had to be there at the table, even though it was under umbrella, which is the TCAT umbrella, but it's unique to Lawrence sites because it's residents going out there and approaching residents, right? To get them on board with Lawrence Heights revitalization. Me being a part of the Lawrence Heights Revitalization Coalition at this particular moment, we've come along where we have our tenants priorities report, right? So, and I could go on down to community legal services. I'm there because at the same time, you know, tenants' rights is very important. So there's so many different capacity, and I don't want to keep pinpointing, right? But it all plays an instrumental role with equitable development because development is so broad. We could be talking about master plan, the heritage plan, you know, and just having a vast, diverse knowledge. And not only that, advocating for residents, because sometimes residents don't have the time to be at so many different tables, right? So that's why one of the big thing here is to even support a bottom-up process, whereas residents is at the table having an input in all the different decision making.
Wow, sounds like you have been doing a number of things for many, many years. You mentioned that one of your roles was was as a community animator. And so I want to just ask if you feel in your role as a community animator that your efforts were effective.
Very good question. And to be honest, yes, my effort was effective, right? And the reason being, again, being being on the front line as a resident, going to other residents, that was a different approach because people need that touch and people that they could identify with, right? Bringing a message to them. Yes, there was backlash, right? From opposition in terms of being an animator and where this project is going. But at the same time, we are always optimistic pertaining to the future.
Yeah.
Right? So the role that I play was effective being an animator. However, being an animator, it comes with, and again, because at that point, we didn't have a community benefits agreement into place. Yes, we have the LARP, which is the Lawrence Annual Revitalization. We have the secondary plan. We have all these things. But now, moving forward and into the future, because we're talking about 2022 onwards, right? That role as an animator, yes, it was effective, but it was lapse in terms of succession planning. Right? Because for phase one, again, the animator program, when I went out there and say animator, people are thinking I'm talking about, you know, Naruto or something of that sort. Right? But we're talking about communities engaging, community members engaging with other community members to bring forth this plan that is going to be beneficial for us all. So I want to leave it there, right? So it was effective, but at the same time, where the succession planning comes into play and where everything, because to date, the community animator program has been discontinued in Lawrence sites.
So it sounds as though that particular type of work was one that was really meaningful at a certain time, right? And then really wasn't replaced in a way that that ensured that that gap or that even responsibility, as you said, of residents talking to residents could sustain itself. It doesn't seem like that happened.
So it was rebranded, and as a result of residents weren't at the table in terms of making certain decision, in terms of planning, a lot of things fall through. because now things are trickling down from the top to the bottom. But we work, and I remember I tell you about a lot of grassroots from working from the ground up. So it was a different approach where things are trickling down per se, where we should be working from the ground up through every phase throughout this 40-year plus plan.
Wow. So it sounds like even that residents should actually even be involved in something like sustainability conversations around engagement and what things work and what things would need to change. So I want to ask, this is our last question. This is our last question right now. And so I want to know what, in your opinion, given that you have so much history and relationship to this work and you have seen things change, evolve, and understand that you're also thinking about what comes next and the future, what do you feel needs to happen moving forward so this Rewrite project can ensure that it is more equitable and inclusive for all those people in the community?
What I think needs to happen moving forward, and as I told you in one of my roles, being the project coordinator for the Lawrence Heights revitalization, Lawrence Heights residents have came up with the community priorities, right? So moving forward, I feel the different stakeholders should have adopt the community priorities, right? Which, number one, support a bottom-up process. I talk about that with resident being at the table and being at the table being fruitful, right? Decent work and economic opportunities, affordable home ownership. I know we're talking about the growth plan for Ontario, right? We have a rent-to-own team within here working on a feasible plan to ensure that we have that generational wealth within here, talking about the people-based asset initially that we need to have in place to talk about the equitable development. We're also talking community space, right? I talk about the federal government and funds trickling down to ensure that we have a community up, state of the heart community up, right? The social cohesion within our social development plan. We need to still have those things in place, social development, and also the community safety, right? So that's one theme within itself, which is so compact. But again, if you're talking about the social determinants of health, it takes so many different things into consideration, right? Zero displacement. It may seem like it's fallen off the table, but it's so crucial in this phase, right? To ensure that people are not displaced at a time when rent, and we're talking about social housing. Believe me, that's still crucial. And also the environmental sustainability, right? Making sure we are in between the island. Our neighborhood is divided by the island. The pollution, making sure soil, things like that is in place, right? Because again, that all speaks to the social determinants of health. Once we have this priority in place and endorsed and taken into consideration by all the stakeholders, we could work together and see equitable development for moving forward for phase 2 and phase 3.
Yes, Trudy-Ann, thank you very much. I appreciate, having the chance to hear from you and understand that in your perspective, and this is a perspective for many community members, that in fact, equitable redevelopment is really about seeing and developing for the people who are already living there, right? And ensuring that what they need in their vision for the future of their community is also a part of what this actual community will be in the end or after it's completed. And that to me feels like it's very different than the priorities of those who are actually going to be building this community, right? When we know we're talking about finances and capital investments and dollars.
Fair enough. And I want to even talk about the economic development. For example, I was one of the first cohort for the Limitless Heights scholarship, right? So I was able to get that, go back to school, be a licensed paralegal. I'm still on the ground, using my expertise of what I have to ensure that, putting that to good use, right? And I was able to get that help, right? Based on economic and equitable development. So why not push that as a new wave to ensure all all members of the community, not just some, in whatever dimension, get to benefit as well.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if you have any last final points or thoughts that you want to share before we wrap up for the evening.
Wow, this is a very good interview. I think I said all
Yeah,
right
yeah.
for now, because I could go on and on, but I think we could cut it here. Thank
Okay.
you, Kaydeen.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you very, very much.
This is the shift. Big change, big things in a phase. Yeah. Big change, big things in a phase. Yeah. Big change, big things in a phase. Yeah. A new phase. Yeah. This is the shift. Vibrations been raised.
This podcast is brought to you by North York Community House. North York Community House builds strong, resilient, and inclusive communities in Northwest Toronto. We help children, youth, parents, and seniors become active, engaged citizens who lead positive change in their neighborhoods. Find us at nych.ca.